We are continuing in the laws of Basar B'chalav. We are in Siman Pei Tes, chapter 89, and we are moving on to Seif Beis. So we're talking about not to eat cheese after meat, but now we're going the other way, and we're going to talk about eating meat after cheese. So we're in the second halacha over here. So the halacha says in the Shulchan Aruch, this is again 89.2, Achal gvina mutar lechol achra basar miyad. Having eaten cheese, you may go ahead and eat meat immediately afterwards, with some conditions. Check your hands so there's no cheese stuck on them. And at night, we can't see so well, because back then they didn't have electric lights, and it was expensive to light a candle. So wash them. Oh, and also, you have to rinse out your mouth. And to rinse it. So you have to wipe it and rinse it. So you have to wipe your mouth with some bread, okay, and chew on the bread a little bit, and wipe out your mouth well. And you can use anything to do this really, except for flour, dates, and vegetables. Why? The cover of the shinai. The spot, so you might get these things stuck on your palate, which the Ramah explains is that space that's in between the place where you swallow and the top of your mouth behind the teeth. Okay, so you don't get your food stuck there, so that won't effectively clean it. So because it won't wipe it clean, and so therefore you have to wash out your mouth with some water, or maybe even with some wine, because back then wine was often more common than water. When does this apply? But basar behema bechaya. For this is for the meat that comes from either cattle, or from the more wild animals like venison. But if you're going to eat fowl, the flesh of the fowl, meaning like chicken after the cheese, you don't have to rinse and wash or all that stuff. And the Ramah says, and some people are still strict to have a waiting period with meat after cheese. And that's our minhag. Kol shagvina kasha, as long as the cheese is hard. We don't eat even chicken after that. Just like with cheese after meat. And similarly, and you can't complain about that custom. They have to just do the rinsing and the wiping. And the washing off their hands. Nonetheless, it's good to be strict. So let's talk about this other side of the story of waiting for cheese waiting for meat after having cheese. So the Gemara in Chulin, it is on Kuf Hamad Aleph. So it says that Rav Asi asked the following question from Rabbi Yochanan: How much do you have to wait between meat and cheese? So we saw this Gemara already. He says, you don't wait. And the Gemara rejects that. It says, 1 second. Rav Chisda says that if you eat meat, you can't eat cheese afterwards. If you eat cheese, you can eat meat after it. Okay, so what we're saying is that how much time do you have to wait between cheese and meat? So he says, no time whatsoever. Okay, so even though the question sounded a bit flimsy, that's what he was referring to. Okay? So that's what the Gemara says. If you look a little earlier, it says Rav Yitzchak, Bered Rav Marsharshia, he went to Rav Ashi's house. And he brought him some cheese, and he ate it. He brought him some meat, and he ate it. And he didn't wash his hands. Okay? The plot thickens. So he asks him, so I thought we learned that that by Rabbi Abba, that even for chicken and cheese, that they could be eaten without having to worry about the cleanliness. So, that by chicken and cheese, that's fine. But here I gave you meat and cheese, and you didn't wash your hands. So Rav Ashi explains that's only at night you have to wash your hands. But during the day, I can see if I have anything on my hands. Right? Anything there? Right? Okay. So Rashi, it says that Rashi explains that they would eat one thing and then try to eat the other thing, and they don't need to wash their hands or to rinse out their mouth. Okay. So the difference is that by the meat that comes from cattle, right, you need to go ahead and rinse out your mouth, okay? Because you see that later on, which is why we just quoted, that you shouldn't have anything stuck in your mouth from the first thing, and then also that since you can see your hands, there's no problem for that. Rashi explains. So the Rambam brings on this halacha, and he says that someone who's eating cheese or drinks milk at first, they may go ahead and eat meat afterwards immediately, and they need to rinse off their hands and wipe their mouth between the cheese and the meat. Okay, and then the Torah brings that down here as well, which eventually becomes our Sif Beis in the Shulchan Aruch. It says, if you eat cheese, you may eat meat afterwards immediately, as long as you look at your hands to make sure there's nothing stuck on your hands. And if it's at night, you have to rinse your hands. Okay, so that's how they bring the Gemara. And then they also quote the Rabbeinu Peretz, which is brought down in the Hagaos Smak. And he says that you should wash your hands even during the daytime, because sometimes things get stuck to your hands and they're very, very greasy, and so therefore you should still do it during the daytime as well. Now the Beis Yosef has a little interesting statement he brings in over here, but it's back in the laws of Suda in Orach Chaim Kufayin Gimel, which we've been referring to that quite a few times. So he brings down the Rashba, who is quoting in his book on Isser V'Heter called the Torah Sabayis. The reason why you can eat meat immediately after cheese is because the cheese is rather soft and doesn't hold a place in between your teeth. Okay, and we saw earlier the Rashba says that that's the reason why you have to wait for meat. Then the Rashba continues and explains that there are those people who are strict on themselves to eat meat after cheese, to not eat meat after cheese inside of one meal, because of a statement of the Zohar. Oh, I'm sorry, I think that's the end of this quote of the Rashba over here. Right, so the Rashba doesn't bring the Zohar. The Beis Yosef brings the Zohar, and he says that in the Zohar it says that one shouldn't have meat and milk inside of the same meal, or within the same hour, or within the same, anything. And so sometimes, you find that you would bring bad things to yourself if you have them on each other. We're not going to go through the whole Zohar over here. The Mordechai brings down, okay, and this also brought up in Beis Yosef, that he didn't eat meat after cheese because, and he's quoting this in the name of the Maharam Rottenberg, because at one time it happened that in between meals he found that he had cheese stuck between his teeth, and so therefore he made an enactment that one should be strict on cheese as well, okay, but only on himself. And this is not like somebody who is adding to the Talmud or disagreeing with the Talmud, which would be inappropriate. It's just that he saw a problem and he wanted to fix it for himself. Okay, and so that's why he went ahead and did it. But he didn't make this extension to chicken, okay, or other types of fowl, because he saw that they were eaten rather freely, according to the Gemara, and he even quotes the Gemara's language for that. Okay, so the Beis Yosef also says that maybe had he seen the Zohar, he would have been more strict, even though he only made this thought process on his own. The Ramah here brings on the Sefer Isser V'Heter, and he says that there's no prohibition of meat after cheese. It's only the flavor that becomes a problem, and we saw this earlier with Rashi and the Rambam. Okay, and it's the leftover flavor, so you don't have that with cheese. Okay, and so he says that. Nonetheless, it's a appropriate thing to do to be strict on that. So the Shari Tshuva, oddly enough, brings down a Tshuva from the Chacham Tzvi and another Tshuva from the Radvaz that anything that that is not mentioned in Shas and Poskim, that only comes from the Kabbalah. It's a nice thing to follow from the Kabbalah. So the Zohar is a nice thing to follow. And the Gra himself also says that one should make a little pause between cheese and meat because of the statement of the Zohar. So even though we see from the poskim that there really is no need to, and the clear halacha is like that, the Beis Yosef himself doesn't feel that that's the proper conduct, even though he brings a strict halacha that way. So we see there's three types of conduct that come out of this halacha. We see, number one, the Gemara says that one can eat meat right after cheese, washing your hands at night and rinsing out your mouth whether it's day or night. The Zohar doesn't allow you to eat meat after cheese within the same meal, and there's a strictness to even wait even within the same hour, and it doesn't matter what type of cheese it is. It could be cream cheese, it could be Parmesan cheese, doesn't matter. And the Gra brings down that the Zohar is talking about waiting an hour, and we saw that earlier mentioned by the Ramah in the last Sif as well. And the Mordechai brings from the Maharam that the only thing that's at issue between him and the Talmud is that if the cheese is hard, you have to wait. So let's take a look at the Zohar here for a second. Okay, so according to the Zohar, you have to have a waiting period. So is it the same rule that we learned earlier about having to say Birchas Hamazon because they can't be in the same meal? So the Levush says that the Zohar is trying to say not to eat meat and milk at the same meal. So even if you have the milk first and then have the meat afterwards, you have to have two separate meals. Okay? But if you have Birchas Hamazon, you can have two separate meals. And the Prima Gadim brings this down as well over here. And this is also mentioned in the work Misgeres HaShulchan. Okay? Misgeres HaShulchan, a nice little, compact little book on Basar that got published about 30, 40 years ago. The Pri Chadash and the Pri Toar and the Chida, they all write in the name of the Shlah to follow the Zohar, and you must wait a full hour, even if you bench in between. So that's their opinion. Okay. Now the Ramah and the Mechaber, as we saw, have a difference of opinion. So we saw the Mechaber, the Beis Yosef, basically writes you can do it immediately as long as you do all the washing and the scrubbing, and the Ramah brings down that we're supposed to be strict between cheese and then meat. And he brings specifically about the hard cheese. Okay, so the Mechaber doesn't seem to take a stand on that Zohar that he quotes himself in Orach Chaim. So it seems like the Ikar Halacha is to be lenient and not to be strict, while the Ramah is saying that if the cheese is hard, the Maharam is the proper approach to follow. So in more modern times, the Shut Shevet Levi from Rav Wozner and Rav Yitzchak Weiss from Moshe Sternbuch and a whole bunch of later Haredi authors, Rav Elyasher, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. They would sometimes say that they makbid on themselves. Some people even said they needed to wait 6 hours when there was a long break. But some of them said that they only required 1 hour. Aaron Cutler used to tell people they didn't have to wait very long, but there is that. So the Ben Ish Chai says for Sfardim that when the cheese is hard and it's been aged for quite a bit, then the custom is to wait an hour. Okay, so they kind of bring this down. We'll come and see the Shach here in a second, where the Shach talks about this idea of hard and long and how long we're waiting for, and the Taz also. So we'll get back to that in a second. But most poskim it's kind of a mixed bag. Okay, so they don't have a clear answer on it. The Ramah himself says that the waiting is for that. So when he talks about by Shavuos, in Orach Chaim Siman Taf Sadi Dalid, he says that on Shavuos the minhag is to eat dairy things on the first night, and the thing is that you need to have two types of cooked foods, and so we do that on Pesach also, he points out. So that's why we eat dairy foods and then meat foods. Okay, but however, we have to have two separate breads for each meal, and he said that's the custom. So the Ramah is not worried so much about the Zohar himself either on Shavuos, and he allows you to go ahead and kind of set aside this meal. Now maybe he agrees to still wait only an hour, so it's not it's not that. It's really his big thing is to make sure you have two sets of rolls for both meal. So that's what he says. So the Chidah says that the Ashkenazic custom is actually to wait, like the Zohar. And so they wait about a little more than half an hour. Okay, so that's the Chidah's interpretation of this. So let's take a little bit of a deep dive, and then we'll kind of wrap this up because the holiday of Shavuos is actually coming up pretty quickly from when I'm making this video. So it's always good to kind of talk about this issue and talk about Shavuos a little bit. So when the Mechaber says you can eat it immediately, so what we're saying is that most people don't have that minhag. So the Ben Ish Chai writes that the minhag in Yerushalayim in his day was that no one waited, and he also points out that there might be a good reason to wait if the cheese has been aged in a storage facility for a long time. So that may be a good idea. That's his opinion. Okay, but accordingly, we don't see very many opinions in the Sfardim that seem to require any waiting after cheese whatsoever, even for hard cheese. But some people feel that it might be worth waiting. The Ramah, who says that we're strict, so there's two approaches here. The Taz says that there's no requirement to wait, just like the Rambam says, and it's how the Mechaber brings it as well. And it's only a problem of the meat that's stuck in between the teeth, and we brought it before about meat getting stuck in between your teeth. Okay, but we don't really have that except for maybe hard cheeses. So the Taz basically says that therefore, if the cheese is quite wormy and it gets stuck in between your teeth, then it seems like it's worth to be strict in such situations. And especially to clean out your teeth and to wipe along the front of the teeth and also to clean in between the teeth. The Shach says that if it's been aged about 6 months, that's considered the waiting period, and that the Ramah himself brings that in the Sefer Torah Chatas. Okay, so he says, that's what he says. Now for our cheeses in our day and age, which are made in most of them are mechanically made. They're not aged for very long. So most poskim seem to feel that that they can still have a rule of being a kasha if they go more than 6 months, and some seem to say that you can be lenient on them. Okay, and it's case by case. So for example, I've seen the OK puts out something saying that Cheez-Its are aged 6 months and therefore have to wait after Cheez-Its. So there's a lot of that. So there's also other issues too about whether or not, according to the Ramah, if you have to actually wait a full 6 hours, or if it's just the 1 hour. So the Mechaber, who was talking about waiting, his waiting period is 6 hours. So, and he doesn't say anything for cheese. So the Ramah, who is Mekel even after like Tosfos, so it doesn't seem like you have to wait very much at all, and maybe even a simple hour would be fine. So it doesn't seem like waiting more than an hour, but there's still poskim who bring to wait 6 hours. This is what I like to call a naya minig, which is that for centuries no one had such a custom, but because everyone came in later and they tried to kind of settle all the scores later on, they come up with this idea they have to wait 6 hours. And it's, as I said, mentioned before, it's brought down in the Shevet HaLevi from Rav Wosner, Moshe Sternbuch. But we don't find any mention of such a custom at all to wait 6 hours. Even the Shach himself says that the Ramah was talking about waiting an hour because he doesn't even hold of an hour between meat and cheese. So to argue that he holds more than that doesn't feel authentic. So when it comes down to eating, let's sort of wrap it all up here, and we'll kind of apply it to Shavuos and to regular life as well. So we find that by the din of the Gemara that it's permitted to eat cheese after meat, and it's just a question of what time of day that it is, if you can see it, that it's clean, and so on and so forth. The hands are clean from it. And the Rabbeinu Peretz adds on a little chumrah that said even according to the Gemara that if your hands could be dirty, you still have to wash them during the daytime. And so the Okimta is just to say that their cheeses weren't so sticky. Maybe our cheese is a little more sticky. But the simple halacha, which is the one brought in the Rambam, You don't really need to do a whole lot except rinse out your mouth and maybe wash your hands, okay, if it's at night. The Zohar prohibits eating meat after cheese, and that needs to be a whole new meal, and that you have to say Birkas Hamazon, and you have to wait an hour. And that the idea of waiting an hour, even though it's found in the language, is not necessarily the case. But the Gra says that that's exactly what the language is saying. He says the waiting is 1 hour. And then the Mordechai brings the name of the Maharam of Rottenburg that you have to wait on aged cheese because of either the flavor lasts a long time or the cheese gets stuck in between your teeth. In his case specifically, was the meat got stuck between his teeth. The cheese got stuck between his teeth. Okay, so the final halacha is brought down at the Mechaber. Even though he's aware of the Zohar, he doesn't require anybody to follow it. And the Ramah says that there's a minhag to wait, okay, by hard cheeses, and so he seems to take the approach of the Maharam Rottenburg. So later authorities bring down that the waiting period, the Ramah was talking about, was waiting 6 hours. However, Rav Aaron Kotler said that it don't have to be an hour. Rav Yashiv says that people have the minhag to be made machmir. I don't. Other than the fact that he just said it, there is literally no other mention in any other poskim to wait 6 hours. So if that's the minhag, it's the minhag of where he was, and which also is contradicted by the mention of the Ben Ish Chai, that the minhag in Yerushalayim was to have no waiting period. And so Rav Yashiv made his home in Yerushalayim for many years, and I don't know, maybe the Eidah HaCharedis took that on later, and that became their custom. It's clearly not the custom of the general population. So waiting an hour, according to the Shach, would probably be the most reasonable answer about if you were following the minhag of the Ramah, and that would be consistent with his opinion about waiting after meat. Okay, and the Ben Ish Chai writes that what he did in Baghdad was to be stringent on the aged cheese, but only 1 hour. Okay, so and he felt that aged cheese was aged about a month, but we usually take the approach of being 6 months. And but nowadays it's hard to even imagine that. So if it's not, you may even be able to be lenient even though it says it's been aged 6 months, you may even be able to take a leniency that if it hasn't been aged for a long time in a cheese cellar and all the old ways of making cheese, and Todd also mentioned it has to be wormy. Some of them are moldy and they're soft, squishy, right? So things like Camembert and Brie, these are cheeses that are allowed to kind of change consistency altogether. So maybe you restrict on something like whole Parmesan. I've also seen other people bring down that if it's cooked or if it's grated, or shredded. Those different ways of doing it, or also be considered in it. So it's not, if you're not sure what the minhag is, you can rely on the infinite number of leniencies in this case, and you don't have to be afraid of all the kashrus agencies pretending like they know what the minhag was. That's why we give shurim like this, is to make sure you understand that there are people who come in recently who say the minhag is like this. The minhag probably developed in their community, in the past 150 years. That was the minhag of their community, but we see zero evidence of it from the time of the Ramah until within the recent time period. So their minhag developed at that time period, that's fine. If you move to their community, you're obligated because you moved to their community. But outside of that, it doesn't seem like it has any bearing. And even the Gra himself writes that the strict opinion is only to wait an hour, and the Shach also writes the strict opinion is to wait an hour. So the only person you might argue who holds 6 hours might be the Taz, and that have to be a very, very wormy, cheesy thingy. So it's hard to say that you have to be strict on any of these things since it's not clear, and we generally take that approach. As we mentioned at the beginning, that it's a nice thing to do, but it's not a din of the Talmud. It's not a stricture of any kind. So we will continue next time about following up more about the ideas of rinsing and washing, because right now we're talking about the cheese, but again, a lot of information for one shear. And so I just want to wrap up with one quick thing about Shavuos. With Shavuos, after you have your meat meal, you can wait half an hour or an hour if your custom is to have meat on Shavuos night. Many people just eat dairy and don't wait to have the meat meal. So if you are not following the minhag of the Ramah, you don't have to. You can have your dairy meal and call it a night, and that's perfectly fine as well. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to learning with you next time.